Thank you very much, and welcome to today's press briefing organized by the John Burton Foundation for Children Without Homes and the California Coalition for Youth. My name is Amy Lemley, and I'm the Policy Director at the John Burton Foundation, which was founded in 2004 by former President Pro Tem of the California State Senate, John Burton, in an effort to improve the lives of children and youth in California's child welfare system and to end homelessness among children and youth. We are here today to shine a light on a growing and yet largely overlooked issue here in California, the plight of homeless, unaccompanied youth. Each year in California, 200,000 unaccompanied minors aged 12 to 17 will experience homelessness. Most of these children become homeless after fleeing abuse and neglect. Once homeless, they are incredibly vulnerable to crime, sickness, injury, and sexual exploitation. Currently, California is fighting the battle against youth homelessness with almost no resources. We will begin our press briefing today by learning more about this tragic shortage of assistance from Ms. Jenny Puttyfoot, Director of the California Homeless Youth Project. Following Ms. Puttyfoot, we will have remarks from Senator Carol Liu, followed by Senator Alan Lowenthal. Both Senator Liu and Senator Lowenthal are long-standing champions of California's most vulnerable, and will discuss 3 legislative proposals to address youth homelessness in California. Next, we will hear from 2 formerly homeless young people. First, Carla York from Eureka, followed by Shamari Kelly from Riverside, who is also a member of the California Coalition for Youth Board of Directors. Following Mr. Kelly, we'll be joined by Sherilyn Adams, Executive Director of Larkin Street Youth Services and a board member of the California Coalition for Youth. Larkin Street Youth Services assists over 3,400 homeless youth annually in San Francisco. At the conclusion of these remarks, the speakers will be available to answer your questions. Again, thank you for being here, and I'd now like to present Ms. Jenny Puttyfoot.
Thank you, Amy. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank both Senator Liu and Senator Lowenthal for their leadership and commitment to homeless youth and the issues that they face every day on the streets in California. As Amy said, my name is Jenny Puttyfoot. I'm the project director of the California Homeless Youth Project, which is a multi-year grant-funded research and policy initiative that's designed to highlight the voices of youth themselves and draw attention to the issues that homeless youth face in the state. I'm very happy to be here today to summarize very briefly a new report that we will be publishing shortly. It's entitled Programs Serving California's Homeless Youth, a Point-in-Time Survey. And as Amy mentioned, based on national research and information about California's youth population, it's estimated that approximately 200,000 young people between the ages of 12 and 18, under 18, are homeless on the street at any one time, joined by thousands of youth ages 18 to 24. Research tells us, in fact, some of our own research tells us, that the majority of these youth are not affiliated with either foster care or the juvenile justice system. They're not what we call systems youth, and therefore programs in the state that are designed to serve foster care and former foster care youth are not typically available and accessible to these youth. So when our project wanted to look at programs serving California homeless youth, we wanted to specifically focus on programs that were targeted to the majority of youth who are on the street, those who are not systems related. We also focused on programs that were not serving chronically homeless adults or homeless families, because what youth have told us and research verifies is that homeless youth don't necessarily access those programs for chronically homeless adults and homeless families for many reasons. Partly they may be turned away, they may have had their belongings stolen, they may have experienced harassment, or they may just not be able to find those programs, and the needs of youth are very different from those other populations. So we went about doing a statewide survey in which we looked for every program we could find that was serving homeless youth specifically. We looked for street outreach services, drop-in centers, emergency temporary and long-term shelters, transitional housing and independent living programs, job training programs, and education programs. And as this map shows, our survey identified a total of just 53 programs throughout the state serving homeless youth. In fact, 20 of California's 58 counties, leaving 2/3 of California counties with no services. 20 counties provide services for this population of youth. We looked exhaustively. In part, we thought there must be more. However, we really were not able to identify more programs in the state. Programs are generally clustered, as you can see, in the Bay Area, in Los Angeles, in Southern California, with a few scattered in Northern California and the Central Valley. The inland parts of the state and the rural parts of the state are specifically, as you can see from the map, have no services available for this population. We found throughout the state a total of just over 1,000 beds of any kind available for these youth, and only 15 programs that provided access to long-term stable housing. There are more findings included in the summary that's available in your packets, and we will be publishing a full report within the next couple of weeks. I'd like to stop with just 2 conclusions based on our research. The first is that we had such a hard time finding these programs. Imagine what it must be like for a young person trying to find support when they find themselves on the street. What this speaks to is the lack of coordination at the state level. Despite the good programs that Cal EMA is overseeing, there is no state plan, no state oversight, and no coordination of the programs and the services that could be made available for these youth. The second conclusion seems fairly clear, that with approximately 200,000 youth needing services at any point in time or being homeless for at least one night a year, and only 53 programs serving these youth, there is a significant gap between the number of programs available and the need we have in California. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm Senator Carol Liu, and I thank all of you for joining us this morning. Homeless youth in our society are largely overlooked. You've heard that. Our state has no organized approach to address their needs, leaving them invisible and underserved. The governor's 10-year chronic homelessness action plan is silent on homeless youth. No state agency or coordinating council has responsibility for determining the number of youth who are homeless, planning for their needs, or intervening to prevent youth from ending up on the street. These youth are alone, unaccompanied by adults, parents, and fending for themselves for food, shelter, clothing, anywhere they can find. Yet sadly, most shelters for the homeless only serve adults. Young people are either turned away or choose to stay away in the cold for fear of their safety and security of their few belongings. My mission is to shine a light on the countless young people without homes. And I'm pleased to be joined with Senator Lowenthal, who also advocates and will share with you new pieces of legislation to help reduce youth homelessness. I'm an author of a bill that would declare homeless youth a priority, special needs population deserving of state policy attention and intervention, and call on the California's Emergency Management Agency to develop a statewide plan to reduce homelessness. The legislation will not end or put an end to homeless youth immediately, but it is a step, an important step forward. Meeting the basic needs of homeless youth and kids is something that Californians should all care about, and today we do embrace that responsibility. I thank you for attending, and I'd like to introduce Senator Lowenthal, who will share his own legislative proposals.
Thank you, Senator Liu. Good morning. My name is Senator Alan Lowenthal, and I'm here to talk about this very important issue. And I will focus on how we're going to regulate emergency youth shelters for homeless youth. I want to thank my colleague, Senator Lieu, and all of you for being here today and making a commitment to make a difference in the lives of homeless youth. As you know, as already pointed out, the recent study by the California Research Bureau finds that less than 1/3 of the counties in the state of California have even a single bed of emergency shelters to help assist homeless youth. Less than 1/3 have even one bed. The report, Programs Serving California's Homeless Youth, a point-in-time survey, cites that out of the state's 58 counties, only 18 have the shelter facilities to temporarily house the over 200,000 youth who are ages between 12 and 17. So that's just a subset with only 50 some odd programs. Less than 18 of those, 18 counties and less than 40 some odd programs have any emergency shelter programs. This is totally unacceptable. These shelters are not only, we're talking about temporary housing, but more important, they're voluntary. The youth have to step up and say, I want to reach out for these services. So when a youth walks into any of these shelters, which takes a tremendous amount of courage, imagine a 12 to 17-year-old out on the street taking that step forward, it's often the only chance that we have to make sure that that youth has the services they need to take them off the streets. I'm pleased to introduce Senate Bill 119 with Senator Lieu as my co-author, which creates a state licensing category for emergency youth shelters, ensuring their ability to preserve over the $6 million in federal funds. Right now, each county does it on their own. Some are more restrictive than others. We need to have a level playing field and the state to say that these are the kind of criteria that emergency shelters need to do so that youth who already are making that big step are not pushed out of the existing shelters. It's incumbent upon us to make policies to protect the most vulnerable and valuable segments of our society, our young children and our youth. If we fail to keep these services available and turn kids away, we're permanently going to lose them to the streets. Our society cannot afford that. I look forward to working with everyone here who is an advocate and to make sure that SB 119 gets signed by Governor Brown and that we get it through the legislature. Again, I want to thank everyone for their hard work and commitment to reduce homeless youth. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Carly York, and I live in Humboldt County. I left home when I was 16. My adopted mother had had a series of brain surgeries, and during that time, I was placed with family friends in California. When I came home after 5 months, she was a completely different person to me. We no longer knew how to connect with each other and work out situations together. I never knew it was okay to ask for or say, and what she could mentally handle hearing about. I needed a mother after being away from her for so long, and she needed a caretaker. I couldn't give her that. Unfortunately for me, no other family members were able to provide me with housing. My grandmother gave me the choice of getting driven to somewhere in Corvallis, Oregon, or back to Humboldt County, California. I chose Humboldt County because I had friends there. In the last year and a half of being on my own, I lived in 7 places. I couch surfed from place to place, and for a brief time, I lived in a field before I got into the Youth Service Bureau's crisis shelter. Fortunately for me, there was a housing program set up specifically for teenagers. In shelters for adults, youth might feel unsafe or out of place. Many people that stay in adult shelters have serious mental health and substance abuse issues. Many people that stay in adult shelters have some teenagers may be scared because of their past negative experiences with adults, like in their families. Teenagers could also become exploited by adults who are staying in the adult shelters. Organizations like the Youth Service Bureau are valuable places for young people, as they give kids a place to feel safe where they have fellow peers to relate to. Camaraderie between residents can create family-type bonds, which help youth move on with their lives. While living with many teenagers can be a taxing experience, it's also quite rewarding through the friendships developed and the support provided. Since living in the Youth Service Bureau's Launchpad, my life has turned around. I graduated from high school and have become more involved in the local community through various volunteering opportunities. I've learned how to budget so I can have personal items like conditioner, which would have been a luxury to me before. Here there is a balance of responsibilities and personal freedom of choice. I have stability here, and that makes me feel safe. If there weren't places like the Youth Service Bureau available to teens, I would have probably continued to couch surf, and I would have lost a lot of the stability that most kids mentally need, plus a lot of my possessions. Maybe I'd be living in a tent somewhere, afraid of the cops and trying to find places to shower. I consider myself lucky to have gotten in the Youth Service Bureau, and I am so thankful for everything that the staff there has done for me. I hope these types of shelters continue to be available to youth just like me.
Hello, my name is Shamari Kelly. I am 19 years old. When I was 15, my mom and I weren't getting along too good. Being a single parent and raising a child became stressful for her and created problems between us. Problems such as apartment finding, buying food, stuff like that. I ended up at an emergency youth shelter called Safe House, where they provided services for teens suffering domestic violence, drug addiction, unplanned pregnancies, gender identity issues, depression, and life on the street. While at Safe House, I received services that provided me with essential tools to rebuild my relationship with my mom. Being in Safe House with their counseling services helped me realize what I was doing wrong and what needed to change in order to reconcile with my mom to build a healthy relationship. Without these services available to me, I'm sure that I would have been homeless and apart from my mother for a much longer time. While at youth shelter, I met many other homeless youth. Some of the youth I met were homeless because they had been kicked out from home, and others found themselves there because they had nowhere else to go. I've talked to many youth that were thankful for this program being available so that they could work on their relationship with their parents and escape abuse inside their household. There are many homeless youth in America that aren't as lucky as I was. Most programs like Safe House are small and only have little space for youth. There are so many youth that need this type of assistance each year, but due to the low funding, there are enough spaces available. Also, there aren't programs like this in every community. I think it would really make a big difference if more programs like this were available to youth to make sure their voices don't go unheard and left out. Thank you.
Good morning. I just want to take a minute to really celebrate the people behind me, in particular Shamika and Carla, who just gave such incredible testaments of why we all are here today. I'm Sherilyn Adams with Larkin Street Youth Services in California Coalition for Youth. I think this is an incredible day to celebrate for homeless youth throughout California. These pieces of legislation will make a profound impact, can make a profound impact on the lives of all of the homeless youth in California that everybody in this room and that we all care so much about. As has been stated, there are just insufficient services and insufficient safety nets available for a largely, up until now, invisible population. And through the leadership of Senator Lieu and Senator Lowenthal, we're going to be able to have a plan. We're going to be able to establish safety and security for our youngest homeless youth, and we're going to be able to have a plan that will allow all homeless youth, 13 to 24, to know what the services are, to have access for services throughout the state of California, and that all providers can work together in a coordinated manner to make sure that nobody falls through the cracks, to make sure that no matter what your history is, whatever happened to you as a young person or as a teenager that resulted in you being on the streets, that you will have the availability of resources, you will know where they are, and you'll be able to have the support, both the immediate safety of a shelter as well as the benefits of education, employment, housing, all of the things that are critical to safely transition into adulthood. And those will be available to you statewide. And it's through the leadership, as I said, of Senator Lieu and Senator Lowenthal and the Homeless Capacity Building Project and the John Burton Foundation and California Coalition for Youth. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for our speakers?
it's going to be a challenge given our current condition, but it's a matter of priorities. And so our particular bills don't have, quote, I don't think funding in it. It's more of a statement. As I said, mine is more of a statement. But we certainly hope that the John Burton Foundation is pursuing federal dollars and maybe some private foundation grants that we hope that we can get this thing off the ground.
We also remember that most of the funding that we're talking about is federal funding. The emergency shelters in California, youth homeless shelters, are funded by federal funds. But we have no mechanism to really make sure that they're all applying for this, that the other counties are also providing these kinds of services and that they can access this. And by having a level playing field and having the state oversee the licensing part, we're not talking about the funding, to make sure that as many counties, as many people will develop these programs and seek federal funding, it elevates the status within the state and moves us along. And so we're not really asking for money at this moment. We're trying to make sure that we really are in a position to access all of these federal funds. Well, the problem is when we have counties that are very, very restrictive. We're not having a state fund that will say that there can't be differences, but what it'll do is to set criteria for that all must. And so some counties say, well, you have to speak to your parents before we can allow. That's an impossible goal for youth to reach, because that may be the very reason why they've left. And so they have no access to shelter. Those are the issues that we wish to deal with.
Are there any other questions for our speakers?
I can let Senator Liu deal with the larger. I can just say where I am as part of this coalition, you have to crawl before you walk. Right now, the state is doing nothing.
Right.
We need to begin this process, and this is the first step to beginning to have real services for homeless youth.
Again, my piece of legislation will just simply acknowledge that this is indeed a problem, and it is something that we have never talked about before. So it is bringing it to light to make sure that folks understand that it's just not about foster kids. It's about kids who have just been lost through the system. And apparently there are, a couple 100,000 kids who are, quote, lost in the system. So we need to address this problem and come up with some kind of solution that benefits, or at least not only acknowledges that there is a problem, but try to build a system that is inclusive and trying to solve some of these issues for the state of California.
This is Amy Lemley with the John Burton Foundation. One piece I'd like to add about this legislation in the context of other legislation, Assembly Bill 12 was signed by the Governor Schwarzenegger last September, and what it does extend the upper age for young people in foster care to age 21. Now, the way this relates to these pieces of legislation is in the past, when we saw a homeless 16 or 17-year-old, they were so near the end of their foster care eligibility, even if they were a victim of abuse and neglect, we often were not very successful at having those young people access those services. Our hope now is, with foster care now extending till 21, we can ensure that youth who are suffering abuse and neglect have access to that system. And so the plan that Senator Liu's legislation calls on will specifically require our child welfare system to partner with the Cal Emergency Management Agency, so that we are not using scarce state resources, but we're also thinking how to fully leverage those federal resources that are available for things like child welfare. Are there any other questions? Mm-hmm.
That's a great question. And only thing I can say right now with my piece of legislation is that we cannot live in denial any longer. There are 200,000 youth on the streets. They cannot access services. Most counties do not have anything for them. As you've seen, they're only in particular spots in the state. Before we even begin to talk about how we access additional funds, the state has to come to grips with that this is a problem and this is an issue. And these pieces of legislation allow us to begin, without being very costly, begin to address this immense problem. Once we come out of this denial and acknowledge that we can no longer afford to have 200,000 youth on the streets, then we can work together on a plan to fund it. But we're still in denial in the state.
Are there any other questions that people have?
There aren't no state dollars currently, but, well, we'll see what happens. We are hopeful that since the federal government has separated and has identified monies to help this population, that we can be successful in securing that. But we can't be successful in securing that unless the state has a plan. It's like the cart before the horse kind of thing. So we need to demonstrate that, yes, indeed, we recognize that this is an issue and that we have a plan to be successful with. So it's all starting out this conversation. And so, and that's what we've done this morning. And hopefully that we will have the support of all the advocates here, that, to put this plan together, to apply for federal dollars, and to be, successful with what we do. And when times get better in the state of California, and they will, that we can certainly integrate perhaps even what we do with youth, with foster youth, et cetera, with homeless youth and all these other programs that we have, that we do something very holistic about our young people who are in dire situations. They're very supportive. They do today with emergency issues, and this is the human side of an emergency, really a human side of emergency issues with the younger people. Yes, they're supportive.
What who's funding some of these few shelters that are there right now? Where does that funding come from? Is it a variety of mechanisms now? I mean, how are they getting the money from doing that? Why aren't they
So I think the issue is that the federal dollars come through the Federal Homeless and Runaway Youth Act, and that's what funds the emergency shelters and street outreach and transitional living programs. I think the goal today is that we really want to be able to maximize California's competitiveness for those funding sources, because as has been mentioned, they are, of course, limited, as all public dollars are. So the goal with the plan and with the emergency shelter regulations is really for California to be able to maximize its ability, all the existing programs that are receiving funding to continue to be able to be competitive and continue those services, as well as to be able to start potentially services and other programs that we can do by being more coordinated, by having a good plan, and by being able to maximize, again, each individual county's competitiveness or service provider's competitiveness for those federal dollars. Yes. Yes, that's a great point. Yes, certainly all of the federal dollars that come through, most of the providers do end up using either city dollars or private foundation or individual donor dollars to support the work as well. So it is a combination of funds that often support the work that the providers are doing. The federal funding is kind of the good launching point, if you will.
Just one bit of specificity I wanted to provide at the beginning of this process. A question in our minds was how much money is the state of California investing in homeless youth? We thought it was $1 million. However, after a recent meeting, we realized it's less than $500,000 in the 200,000 homeless youth. So the investment that is being made is doing amazing things. How far Cal EMA is able to stretch that is quite impressive. But for 200,000 homeless youth, to be assisted by less than $500,000 statewide raises some very serious questions. So just some exact dollar figures on that.
And just let me clarify, Cal-EMA hasn't taken a position on the bill, but they have been supportive of homeless youth.
Question.
Yes. I have a question for this you said that assessment said that the growing population of California homeless youth, is that just growing with the population normally, or is there any, with the recession, is there any other?
There is. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported in July that the rate of unemployment among 16 to 24-year-olds is the highest since the Bureau started to collect data on that age group in 1948. And so really the secret victims of this recession are young adults. As everyone kind of takes the lower paying jobs, the people who are being knocked off the employment totem pole altogether are young adults. And so as their employment opportunities dry up, they literally have no income. And where are they turning? They're trying to turn to youth shelters and finding that they're simply not available. So the current recession is a major factor in moving young people from marginal employment to no employment. And unlike older workers, they have not worked enough to qualify for unemployment and some of the other public programs that older adults are able to access. Are there any other questions? We keep on kind of going back and forth.
One of the homeless youth forums that's been held over the past couple of years, I think the representation was made by somebody on the panel about Prop $63 being one of the key sources of shelter and funding services. I know a church that has shelter that uses Prop 63. What are the implications about the one-time ownership and changes that may be included in Prop 63? So first, where the fact right now?
Well, you're absolutely right that Prop 63 itself is under threat in terms of the shifting of funds. But when we're beginning with that there's less in terms of overall total state funding for homeless youth is less than or approximately $500,000, and that's it. We're not talking about any resources being shifted away now with Prop 6. But what we are saying is those that we potentially could access will be even more difficult to access. And so what we're trying to do is to build an infrastructure, build a statewide approach to, as I pointed out, so that, that each county has to begin to deal with some of these issues so that without forcing them, mandating them, without coming up with resources, but to begin the discussion that this is a totally unacceptable that 200,000 of our California youth are on the streets, not receiving any services. We know the devastating impact that if they're not back, if they don't graduate from high school, if they're not back in school, that the unemployment rate will be above 20%, that they have to stay, and that we cannot reach out. These are all voluntary unless we have something to offer, and this is our first step. And that's all we're doing is trying to take a small first step on a long-term journey.
I want to thank each of the speakers very much for being here today and thank all of you for being here. On behalf of the John Burton Foundation and the California Coalition for Youth, this does conclude today's press briefing. So thank you again.